Benny Hill was the most successful comedian the world has ever known. He was the lad from Southampton who did the rounds of the music halls and working men's clubs, doing the jokes.
Benny Hill was a comedy genius, but he was also a lightning rod for controversy. For every million fans he gained, it seemed a new critic emerged, ready to tear him down.
Mr. Hill, what has television given you?
Well, nervous dyspepsia, indigestion, heartburn.
They called his humor outdated and offensive. For years, the network ignored them because the ratings were just too good to argue with. But then came one episode, one particular series of sketches that gave his enemies everything they needed. This wasn't just another risque joke. This was the moment that made the network panic and pull the plug forever. A global juggernaut. Alfred Hawthorne Hill, known to the world as Benny Hill, was born in Southampton, England, in 1924. His grandfather had been a circus clown, so performing was in his blood. Before he became a comedy legend, though, his life was surprisingly ordinary. He worked at a department store, delivered milk, and even served as a mechanic and truck driver in the British Army during World War II. The most shocking fact is that his time entertaining troops after the Normandy invasion is where he truly honed his craft, learning to make anyone laugh anywhere. He adopted the stage name Benny as a tribute to his favorite American comedian, Jack Benny, and set his sights on show business. His big break came not on stage, but on the radio. However, it was the dawn of television that was waiting for a star like him. On January 15, 1955, The Benny Hill Show premiered on the BBC, and television comedy was never the same. The show was a unique mix of live on-stage sketches and pre-filmed segments, a format that gave Hill incredible creative freedom. His humor was a masterclass in variety: slapstick, parody, clever wordplay, and those famous double entendres that went right over the kids' heads, but made the adults roar with laughter. During his years at the BBC, Hill surrounded himself with a brilliant cast. One of the most beloved was Jackie Wright, a short, bald-headed actor who became the perfect foil for Hill's antics. He was the man Hill would often playfully slap on the head in fast motion, a gag that became an instant fan favorite. But the thing is, the show hadn't even hit its peak yet. In 1969, Hill made a move that would turn him from a British star into a global icon. He took his show to Thames Television. Instead of airing every week, the program was transformed into a series of massive, hour-long specials. This gave him a bigger budget and more time to perfect his elaborate sketches and musical numbers. It was a brilliant move. The show's popularity exploded, and it was eventually broadcast in over 140 countries. To put it mildly, Benny Hill was on top of the world. His physical comedy needed no translation, and audiences from America to Africa were crazy about him. The most shocking fact is that at its height, one of his specials in 1971 pulled in over 21 million viewers in the UK alone. That's more than a third of the entire population at the time. A key to this global success was the show's most iconic segment, the runoff chase sequence. You can see this everywhere in his Thames Television episodes. The gag was simple but genius. It featured Hill being chased by a motley crew of characters: police officers, stern-looking women, vicars, and of course, a group of attractive ladies in revealing outfits. The entire scene was sped up, making the frantic chase even more ridiculous. The secret was a filming technique called undercranking, where the camera runs slower to create that signature fast motion effect when played back. This chaotic, hilarious sequence, always set to the unforgettable tune Yakety Sax, became so famous that the song is now universally known as the Benny Hill theme. But as the show entered the 1980s, a new element was introduced that would become both a huge draw and a major source of controversy. A storm was brewing that would challenge the king's reign: the Angels controversy. As the 1970s gave way to the 1980s, Benny Hill decided to add a new layer of spectacle to his show. He introduced a troupe of beautiful young women, officially known as Hill's Angels. They were initially brought on as dancers for the show's lavish musical numbers, but their role quickly expanded. Soon they were central figures in the sketches, often appearing in provocative outfits and playing the part of the alluring women who would chase Benny, or be chased by him. Their presence undeniably added glamour and energy to the show, and for a time, ratings remained sky high. What many overlooked was that society was changing rapidly. The feminist movement had gained significant ground, and cultural attitudes towards how women were portrayed in media were shifting. The playful, cheeky humor of the past was starting to be viewed through a new, more critical lens. While millions still loved the show, a growing chorus of critics began to label it as outdated and demeaning. The Hills Angels, intended to be a fun and glitzy addition, became a primary target. Critics argued that the women were being used as mere props, objectified for cheap laughs. You see, Benny Hill wasn't just the star, he was the main creative force. He wrote or co-wrote almost every sketch, and the show was a direct reflection of his comedic sensibilities, which were formed in the music halls of a bygone era. He saw the characters as just that, characters in a silly, absurd world. He even gave one of his favorite longtime performers, Jenny Lee Wright, the affectionate nickname the Sexiest Stooge, highlighting his view that the women were in on the joke and were talented comedic performers in their own right. Jane Leeves, who later found international fame on the show Frasier, got her start as one of Hill's Angels. Despite this, the criticism grew louder. It wasn't just coming from academic circles or fringe groups anymore. It was starting to bubble up in the mainstream press. Tabloid newspapers, which had once celebrated Hill as a national treasure, began running stories questioning if his time was up. The thing nobody tells you is that even inside the television network, executives were getting nervous. They were caught between a show that was still making them a fortune in international sales and the growing fear of a public relations disaster. The laughter was still there, but now it was mixed with uncomfortable whispers. The very elements that made the show a hit, the cheeky innuendo and the beautiful angels, were now becoming its greatest liability. Benny Hill himself was largely insulated from the criticism, or at least he appeared to be. He was a deeply private man, and he rarely gave interviews. He simply continued to do what he had always done, create comedy that he found funny. But the world outside his studio was no longer the same one that had first fallen in love with his show. A new generation of alternative comedians was emerging in the UK, and their style was sharp, political, and aggressive. They saw Benny Hill not as a beloved icon, but as the perfect symbol of everything they were fighting against. And one of these new comedians was about to light the fuse, the joke that went too far. The tipping point came in the mid-1980s, spearheaded by a comedian named Ben Elton. Elton was the face of the new wave of comedy, young, loud, and fiercely political. He launched a very public campaign against the Benny Hill Show. He didn't just call the show old-fashioned, he accused it of being actively harmful. On television and in magazines, Elton argued that the show's endless scenes of men chasing scantily clad women contributed to a culture where women were disrespected. To put it mildly, his attacks were brutal. This public condemnation from a fellow comedian changed everything. It gave a powerful voice to the simmering unease that had been building for years. The debate exploded in the British media. Was Benny Hill a harmless entertainer or a menace to society? A writer for one newspaper described the attacks as being like watching an elderly uncle being kicked to the ground by young thugs. But for many, Elton's words rang true. Suddenly, the goofy chase scenes didn't seem so innocent anymore. The beauty pageant parodies, where Hill and other male characters would leer at and judge the women of Hill's Angels, were singled out as particularly offensive. There wasn't one single line or one single sketch that ended the show, but rather the cumulative effect of these scenes. They became the poster child for everything critics disliked. This was the scene that got the show canceled, a recurring theme of objectification that had become impossible for the network to defend. The pressure on Thames Television became immense. Ratings in the UK had begun to slide, though the show remained a massive cash cow overseas. The most shocking fact is that the production costs had ballooned to an estimated £450,000 per episode, which in today's money is well over $1.5 million. The network was now faced with a show that was incredibly expensive, losing its domestic audience and becoming a lightning rod for controversy. The thing is, Benny Hill was offered a chance to change. Network executives reportedly met with him and suggested he update his humor, perhaps toning down the more risque elements and moving away from the sketches centered on the angels. But Hill, a man in his 60s who had built a comedic empire on a specific formula, refused. He didn't understand what the fuss was about. In his mind, it was all just comedy, a bit of harmless fun. This refusal to adapt was, in many ways, the final nail in the coffin. For the network, it was no longer just about one controversial scene, but about a star who was unwilling to change with the times. The risk had become greater than the reward. In late May of 1989, after 21 years and millions of dollars in profit, Thames Television made its decision. They weren't just going to cut the budget or ask for changes. They were going to pull the plug entirely. The final curtain fell without a single word of public warning. The man behind the mask. The cancellation of the Benny Hill Show in 1989 was not announced with a grand farewell special. It was done quietly. One day the show was a cornerstone of the network. The next, it was gone. Benny Hill, the man who had made millions for Thames Television, was simply let go. He learned the news and was, by all accounts, devastated. He couldn't grasp how the show that had been celebrated for decades could now be deemed so offensive that it had to be completely removed from the air. What many overlooked in the midst of the controversy was the man himself. Benny Hill was nothing like his on-screen persona. He was intensely private, shy, and lived a remarkably frugal life. Despite being a multimillionaire, he never owned a house, preferring to live in a small rented apartment. He never owned a car, choosing to walk everywhere. He would reportedly buy cheap food from the supermarket and mend his own clothes rather than buy new ones. He never married and had no children, dedicating his entire life to his work. In the years following the cancellation, his health declined rapidly. In February of 1992, he suffered a heart attack. Doctors recommended a heart bypass, but he refused. A week later, he was diagnosed with kidney failure. Again, he refused treatment. The thing is, on the very day of his passing in April 1992, a new contract from another television network had arrived in the mail, offering him a brand new series. But it was too late. He was found in his armchair, having passed away alone while watching television. Benny Hill's legacy remains one of modern comedy's most complicated tales. For decades after its cancellation, the Benny Hill Show was almost impossible to see on mainstream British television, effectively erased from the very culture that had once celebrated it. In the wake of shifting social attitudes, the show was widely condemned as sexist and outdated, turning its star from a national treasure into a cultural pariah, a symbol of a bygone era that many wish to forget. But you can see his influence everywhere. His pioneering use of fast motion, often set to the iconic yakety sax theme, became a universal shorthand for comedic chaos. His sharp parody skills and fearless, meticulously choreographed slapstick inspired countless comedians and sketch shows that followed, even those who publicly disavowed his style. From music video aesthetics to the visual gags seen in modern sitcoms, the DNA of his work is undeniably present, a testament to a comedic language he helped to write. In recent years, the show has been re-evaluated, with many now viewing it as a complex product of its time. While some parts have aged poorly, featuring tropes that are rightfully criticized today, others remain sterling examples of comedic genius. The debate has shifted from outright condemnation to a more nuanced discussion, acknowledging the show's innocent seaside postcard humor while still recognizing its flaws. Critics began to separate the artist's technical brilliance, his timing, his writing, and his mastery of silent comedy, from the more controversial aspects of his content. This cultural thaw culminated in 2021 when, nearly 20 years after it had last been shown, a major British TV channel brought the show back for its Christmas schedule. This move was significant, introducing a whole new generation to his work and signaling a willingness to engage with, rather than erase, a difficult part of entertainment history. The show was a reflection of its era, but did it deserve to be erased from television history? Let us know what you think in the comments. Be sure to like and subscribe for more untold stories.